Yeah.
The story is not only heartbreaking, of course, but it speaks a lot to how absolutely fucked up our criminal justice system is.
Yeah.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. But just simply the way that they handled you was
Hmm.
to me an atrocity. Just that alone. So
Yeah.
would you mind just telling the story? I've heard you tell it before, but just tell the story
Yeah.
of your life, what was going on in your life that day, and how it went down.
Yeah. So the last time I talked to Danny was the night before he died, January 17th. Actually, hold on, let me back up. Am I saying this correctly? He died the 18th. No, so I talked to him on the 18th. I'm sorry, I'm getting this, even myself confused. Trauma, PTSD, active. This is happening in real time. Okay, so he died on the 18th. I spoke to him 40 minutes before he was killed. This was our last conversation. We talked for only like 4 minutes. If anybody were to go subpoena our call logs, which Mesa has all of because they subpoena everything in my life,
Wow.
you could see that every time I talked to my husband, we talked for a long time. That, or we would talk even for just a few minutes, but we called each other like, I mean, we were just always bored and missing each other, just like
Sure.
constant. I mean, and most of the time it was just stupid conversation. And like half the time I'm editing birth videos on the side and he's doing whatever. We're not even paying attention to each other on the phone, but we're just like on the phone to be together.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I talked to him that night and I was telling him that I didn't feel well and was going to actually lay down in the girls' room with them in their bed and go to bed. So we only spoke for just a few minutes. You would think that I would remember every last thing we said. And honestly, I couldn't even really tell you anything we said during that conversation. It was just, I didn't think that would be our last conversation. I didn't feel well. And at 8 o'clock, I decided to go to bed, even though I'm a night owl who's usually up till 2, 3 in the morning. And for
Mm.
some reason, I went to bed early that night. So we get off the phone and, ultimately everybody has seen the body cam footage that played out not even an hour later. So the next morning I wake up, Danny was supposed to have 2 jobs that night instead of just one. And typically he worked from like 4 to 6 in the morning. So I called him. I woke the girls up. I think around 6 is like the time I'd wake Natalie up to get ready. And we had pulled Emery out of daycare. She had been in daycare for a while, more like a preschool. It wasn't just like a place that they watched her. Like there was like academics and, like really I called like her teacher, her second mom. Like Miss Veronica was incredible. And she's a big part of our story and holding space for Emery. But we had decided that we were actually going to be moving to Mesa, Arizona later that summer.
Oh.
So we had actually planned on moving there. We had spent a lot of time in
Mm.
Arizona. When I had my miscarriage, I took, those 3 months in between that next transfer. We just traveled with him that whole summer and we spent like at least a month in Arizona. We actually stayed at the hotel he died at, which I
Oh.
didn't realize until after he died. And I went to the hotel
Oh.
in person to go see the room and the hallway and all the stuff. And it hit me like a ton of bricks as I was
Oh.
driving into the parking lot and I was like, oh my God, I was like, I'm losing my mind. And I was like, no, there's like this Irish like place, like, and a BJ's like play, like there was like restaurants I could specifically recall. And sure enough, they were right next to it. And I was like, oh my God, we have literally stayed at this hotel as a family together and swam in this pool. Like, I'm like, I wonder what room we were in, like, holy crap, what a weird thing that like not even like a year before. So yeah, the morning of, I call him because Natalie would like want to talk to him sometimes before school and we would just check in and he didn't answer the phone. And so then I'm sending him texts and he doesn't respond. And I don't know how long goes by, 30 minutes or so. And at this point, I thought he was intentionally ignoring me. And I've talked about this and it's something that just eats me alive because it hurts my heart so much that I didn't know my husband was dead. And I started to get so pissed off that I started to send him texts and I was like, what the fuck? Why are you not responding to me? Like I literally was like getting mad because he wasn't responding to me. And I'm like, that's so unlike him. Like, I mean, just like, hey, like if you're busy, that's cool. But like what's like, talk to me, and here he is not texting me back and I'm blowing up his phone. And so I go, to get Natalie ready and we try to call again. I drop her off at school and I take Emery back home. So at this point, like I said, we've taken her out of daycare because we're saving money so we can finally buy our first house. And we're looking at buying out in Mesa, Arizona for, 6 months later down the road this coming summer. And so I get Emery home, and she, didn't want to be awake that early and was like asked to watch a movie or something. So I take her back downstairs into her room, which was like a darker room, had the blinds closed, and put on Tarzan for her, which, man, I'm telling you, to this day, Tarzan is such a huge trigger for me. Like, it literally, I'll just start crying. Like, I can't handle it. I just can't. And we're sitting there, laying there watching it. And I remember kind of feeling like a little sick still. And I'm like, I'm just gonna like close my eyes and kind of like drift off, but be like in that half awake, half asleep state, to like where you're watching your kid, but like you're still like trying to rest, And something just told me, like, you need to figure out what's going on, like try to call him again. And he wasn't answering. So I text my dad and I was like, hey, have you heard from Danny? And he said no. Or I said, have you talked to Danny? He said no. And I immediately was like, okay, that's really weird, because they always communicated after every single job they did. Like, my dad would, for some reason, even when he wasn't working, be awake at 4 a.m. to talk to Danny about his job and like make sure the store went well and that the paperwork was all processed. They had to submit it to like a portal online afterwards, to process it to home office and all sorts of stuff. So I knew something right then, like that wasn't right. And he had 2 jobs to do. So it was like a big, important night for him. And then I asked him, did he show up for his jobs last night? And I'm texting him. I'm not talking to him on the phone. And he says, no. That's all he says. So I get no, back to back twice. And that's when I start like really kind of like, okay, wait, hold on now. And, then my mind starts racing, like, okay, he's not answering the phone. Like, what was the last thing he said? Like, he was just like, he talked about something about he was playing PlayStation. I remember that. And just like talking to his friend, John, I believe, on the game online. And I'm trying to think of like, what in the world's going on? And so at this point I get up and I'm like, I can't go back to bed. Like, I know something's going on. And then I take Emery upstairs and I put her in the living room and I put on some little TV show, and I'm, starting to make calls, trying to figure out what's going on. And first I signed into our email, because usually I would get a confirmation email when he would book, because he would always book through like the Choice like app, or like whichever hotel he was staying with. He had apps and reward points for all of them. Like, we got travel places all the time for free because of just him working so much. He would get those points and then we would get to use them. So like anytime we took our kids to Disney or whatever, like we were staying there for free. And so usually there would be confirmation, and there was no confirmation, which I thought that was so strange, because he always booked. And I was like, okay, maybe he stayed somewhere he knew and he, didn't book it through the app. And so I'm like, okay, but I don't even know where my husband's at. Like, my husband travels so much. Like, I don't even know. Like, I just know he's in the Phoenix area. Like, I have no idea where in Phoenix he's at. I heard him talk about Mesa a lot, and we had stayed in Mesa as a family and yada, yada, but I didn't know he was in Mesa, So I call our bank and I'm like, hey, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to locate my husband. I'm a little concerned. Can you tell me if his card's been used anywhere? And they said, yeah, last night there was some food ordered from this restaurant. And I'm like, okay. So then I Google, the name of the restaurant, and then I call them and I'm like, hey, I'm trying to figure out where my husband is. I can't get a hold of him. I'm a little worried. Can you give me any information as to where you delivered the delivery? And they're like, yeah, we delivered it to this hotel. So then I call the hotel and I asked them to do a welfare check on him, and they told me no. And I wish I could remember word for word what they said, but basically they were acting really weird. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm like, go do a welfare check on my husband. Like, as something, like, I think something's wrong. Like, he didn't show up for work. Like he could have died in his sleep or choked on something, or I don't know. Like, I didn't know what had happened. Like, my mind's going to like the craziest scenarios. Never in my wildest dreams that I think at this point my husband's been shot by police. I can tell you that. But I thought something had happened, and maybe something happened in his sleep or something. I don't know. And ultimately, so they tell me no. And then, at this point I've already called Danny's best friend. I said, hey, when's the last time you talked to Danny? He said, we were playing PlayStation last night. I called Danny's mom, who, Danny his parents and I weren't really close. So
you're trying to
yeah,
find out so you're middle of the story of finding out what the hell happened.
Yeah.
And you're talking to his parents. That's right. That's how I diverted you.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
His parents. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I call his mom at work and I'm like, have you spoken to Danny? Which, I mean, I don't know why they would. From my recollection, I don't even know that they spoke a whole lot. I mean, at least when he was home, like, it's not like I heard him talk to them a ton. And I mean, he talked to me all the time about what he did during the day and who he talked to and stuff like that. So it was a little weird that I would even reach out to his mom, because it's like, why would he talk to you early in the morning? But
Right.
either way, I still reached out. And she said no, and then she starts, texting him and calling him or whatever, trying to figure out what's going on. And so I've alerted them now to something's up. And, I've already talked to my mom and my dad, and, we start calling every hospital in the Phoenix area and the Mesa area, every jail. Like, we were calling everywhere we could, just trying to figure out any information. And then finally,
is the day after, right? I'm sorry, this is the day after, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the day after. He died on the 18th. This is January 19th.
Okay.
About, at this point, probably
That's
at this part of the story, it's probably like 10:30 in the morning
how,
or something like that.
how on earth did they not go to his identification and find who he was and call you? I don't understand that.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay, good.
Oh yeah, there's a whole story about that too.
That's
because they had the wrong Daniel Shaver is the answer to that.
I have not heard this. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, no. Remind me to come back to that, because my PTSD gets me all crazy everywhere. So they let's see, my mom, at this point, we know, like, obviously the hotel, like, they were acting really weird and they just stopped answering our calls. Like, they literally took the phone off the ringer. Like, they allowed it, like, the first like 20 times we called, it just would either be forwarded to like voicemail or ring all the way, and then eventually they just took it off the ringer, so you couldn't even make a call to this hotel. And I was like, what the hell is going on?
Like, I was like, major national chain.
Yes. And I'm like, what is going on? Finally, my mom gets through, because we're all blowing it up. And she's like, look,
what?
I need you guys to tell me what the hell is going on. My daughter is 6 months pregnant. She's at home. She's got 2 kids, and she is freaking out. Like, just tell me what's going on. And the lady, I believe she spoke to, said, we've been instructed not to give a statement. And my mom immediately said to me later on that it went off liability. Something happened at the hotel. So my mom at this point knows something's happened at the hotel, and she's got to call me and talk to me about this. So she calls me and she said, so I talked to them and they said that they've been instructed not to give a statement, and I'm, concerned that something has happened. And I wish I could remember exactly. I want to say that they told her, because I don't think it was me they told, to call a detective with Mesa Police Department, and that they would be able to provide further information for us. So immediately we have this name and number. My mom hadn't called them, and I think this is really important to mention, that I am the first person to be given this detective's name and number. So I'm the first person looking for Danny who calls and leaves a voicemail. So I call, they don't answer. I leave a voicemail. I don't know what I said, but I'm freaking out. I'm looking for my husband. I've been told to call you. I don't know what's going on. And I keep calling back and they're not answering. So I get to the point where I listen to the voicemail, and I want to say it was Detective Rayburn was the person I was supposed to call. And so I listened to his voicemail, and it says something about criminal investigations. And so I type in Detective Rayburn, Mesa, Arizona, Police Department, and Google those keywords, or criminal investigations or something, and it pops up, with like criminal investigations, and then it's like 2 different types of like units that he works for, and one was something drug related, and then the other one was homicide. And I'm like sitting here thinking, like, did my husband like get caught like doing drugs or something? And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I'm like, what is he even doing? Like I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh, like running through my mind, and I'm just like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, he was about to go to sleep. Like what would he have been doing? And then I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel right. And then I'm like, okay, homicide. And I'm like, well, what the hell is that? Because I was in such a shock that I'm like, I don't like, homicide was definitely not the option. So it was like drugs was the option, but then I'm like playing that through my mind. Like, Danny, did make a mistake, and he was on probation. He got a DUI a few years before. And he was 2 weeks away from being off probation when he died. And so Like just knowing that, like drugs were eliminated pretty quickly from my mind because he's tested all the time for stuff, which is another part of this. It's so frustrating. Had he been, you know, allowed to have access to cannabis like he wanted, he wouldn't have probably been drinking, but that's besides the point. Anyways, I'm, you know, making all of these calls, and I, you know, Google this, and so homicide comes up, and I'm like, what the hell is homicide? And I look it up, and I'm like, that means somebody died. And I immediately was, I mean, obviously, like I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, Danny didn't kill anybody. But then that shit hit me. It was like, oh my God, wait, like if it's not drug related, because he's on probation, and I know my husband would never kill anybody. I mean, maybe in self-defense if somebody was trying to kill him or something, but even then, he honestly would probably just take a bullet. Like that's just not Danny. He was not an aggressive person at all. And so then my mind is like, wait, like, is he dead? And is that why I can't get a hold of him? And I'm like, what the hell, you know? So I'm just like trying not to freak out and trying to keep myself calm. And Emery's in the other room, and I can hear her on the TV and watching some little show or something, some, you know, little annoying kids show. And you know, I'm talking to my mom and my dad, and we're all calling each other. Like literally my phone's just like blowing up between all these like calls. And at this point, I had called Mesa Police Department, not the detective, but the actual department, because I'm like, I'm not waiting on this detective to call me back. No one's calling me back. So I called the police station, and I say, I was told that you guys have information with about what's going on with my husband, and I need you to talk to me right now. Like, I'm not waiting another second. I need you to tell me what's going on. And she said, we have nobody in the precinct who can speak to you right now. We will have to dispatch somebody, and it's going to take at least 30 minutes. And I'm like, how is there no police officer? Nobody can talk to me. Like, what is this? Like, this is so frustrating. But that, I mean, what do I have to do but just say, okay, you know? So I'm like, okay, here's my name, here's my number, call me back immediately. And I wait 30 minutes and they don't call me, and I call them again, and I'm like not getting through to anybody, and they do not call me back. And so at this point, with them not calling me back, the only place I could think to call was the medical examiner, the coroner's office. And I Google Maricopa County medical examiner or whatever, coroner's office, and I start the call. And I remember them answering, a woman answered, and I said, hey, I'm trying to locate my husband, and I don't know what's going on. Could you tell me if you guys know of anything? Like, and I don't even realize in this moment, like what I'm really doing, but like, she's like, yeah, sure. Let me, you know, and actually she was kind of a little rude. And she's like, yeah, let me, like, what's his name and date of birth? So I give him his name and date of birth, and she immediately says, we have a file. And I'm like, what? And so my mom tries to call me, and I forward her call to voicemail, and she texts me, and she's like, have you found out anything? I was like, I'm on the phone with the coroner. And she doesn't even respond. And then the lady says, can I place you on a brief hold? And I'm in shock, and I'm like, yeah. And you know, I like it really, like, I mean, it's like this shit is just like the movies. Like, it's so, everything goes quiet, you start to hear ringing, like it's just like, it's just so, it's so movie like, it's so real. And you know, it felt like minutes, days, months, you know, I don't even know how long. And then finally this man answers the phone, and he says, first off, I'd like to send my condolences to you, ma'am. And I just remember, like I said, like everything ringing and going silent, and just like being like taken, you know, I'm just like like I'm taken out of like my reality. And then all of a sudden I come back to, and I hear the TV playing in the other room. And I hadn't even in my like mind processed even what that meant for me, but then it hit me for my kids. That was the first part that really hit me. And I was just like, oh my God, like there's no way, like this like I was just in complete shock. I think that This Is Us really portrayed a really beautifully moving scene. I swear to God, so much of that show could be written about my life. Like there's so many moments of that show that are just so accurate, where she like finds out that her husband died, and she like goes like to the vending machine, and then like comes back, and like the way she, like that scene like plays out, like I literally started panic cleaning. That is the first thing I did. I knew, even though I didn't understand what the hell that fully meant, because I was in shock, all I knew is that, because I called my dad, and I remember my stepmom, I will never forget the sound of her voice as she like screamed out to me, like while crying, like, "Oh, Laney, I'm on my way," and hung up the phone. And, her and my brother immediately came to my house because they live closer. My mom, she's in Tennessee. My stepmom and my dad are just like 45 minutes away. And then I'm thinking so we rented their house, and I'm thinking, oh God, she's on her way. So I start panic cleaning. There's Cheerios under the table and there's toys all over the living room. And, and I'm like panicked, like I've got to get my house in order before all these people start to come over. Like I literally didn't even take a damn minute to sit down and breathe and process any of that. Like I just started panic cleaning and started contracting immediately. And I had to, then call, I want to say Casey was one of the first people I called. She had supported me. We did bereavement training together. She supported me through my miscarriage, and I called her and told her Danny died. And she said, I'm, going to come over today. And, she had to figure out a situation with her kids and that she was on her way, and then I had to remember calling my midwife. And it's just wild to me, like to think back at that. I literally remember being in the fetal position on my hardwood floor, contracting, talking to her in shock. And she was like, I'm on my way right now. And she like drove an hour, or I think she was in Dallas at that point, like 2 hours out to my house to come check on me and take care of me, and ultimately bring me a prescription to stop my contractions because I started going into preterm labor. And then I had to make a call to a backup placenta encapsulator, because I had a placenta that I was about to start processing that morning from a birth that I just served not the night before, but the night before that, that I was going to do the night before, but I felt sick that night. So I decided I'll just start it first thing in the morning. And, this is the day I found out Danny died. So I, called my friend Barbara, and I'm like, I need you to come pick this up. And I said, here's my client's number. I was supposed to go do follow-up postpartum care with her. And I literally never like spoke to her, like ever. I mean, months later or something, but I just said, I was in such shock. I was like, just take my client. I can't even handle this. Like encapsulate her placenta. I need you to go do postpartum care for her. Like I was just in shock. Like I couldn't even process what that really meant for me in that moment. And then I remember having to call the parents of the baby I was carrying, and I didn't want to worry them. And I remember being so like, I texted them and I said, hey, I just want you to know everything's okay, or something along these lines. I'm not, word for word paraphrasing here. I said, but I need to talk to you. And I said, but the baby's okay. I just want you to know the baby's okay. Because we had a miscarriage before, Yeah. And they both work at the same high school. They're both English teachers, and they're both in class. And Ginger's the kind of mom, she was so, they wanted this baby so bad that anytime any little thing, like something went wrong, like they were always so like, they've spent so much money and time and energy and like love and poured their heart into this, that they like, even the slightest thing they would freak out, like, oh God, is everything okay? And so I knew, I was like, I just want you to call me when you guys get at home from school, like we need to talk. And like she was not having any of that. She was like, no, we're talking now. And having to tell her Danny died, and she was like dumbfounded. She was like, no, like there's been a mistake. And I was like, no, like Danny died. And like it was just such a wild thing to have to make all these calls, and to tell people. Like I had to call his best friend back and be like, hey. And he had told me earlier in the morning, because when I called him and said, hey, when was the last time you played PlayStation with him? And I said, John, I think something's wrong. I think Danny's dead. And he said, Danny's not dead, Laney. And I remember him kind of like disregarding it and laughing almost. And I said, no, something's wrong. And I called him back and I told him. And yeah, it was super hard conversations that day. But I was in such shock. I don't think I even came out of shock for so long. Like it's such a weird thing to go through.
Look at what your reflexes were. So the worst thing that ever happened to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So your first reflex was, oh my God, there's Cheerios on the floor. I need to clean up my house for my parents-in-law. So you felt an obligation to them.
Yeah. Well, that would be my stepmom, not my in-laws, but yes.
I'm sorry. Yes. So, yeah.
My stepmom.
Other people. And
other people. Yeah.
And then the couple for whom you're a surrogate, you worried about them and called them, and you took care of them. And of course, your very first thought and your enduring thought was for your children.
Yeah.
other people.
Mhm.
That's really striking to me. And so the person who wasn't being taken care of at all was you.
Yeah.